Welcome back to the All Hazards Prepper podcast. I'm your host, Blake. So great that you are back to with me for a second episode of the All Hazards Prepper podcast. Got a lot of great feedback this week, a lot of good likes, subscribers from the current the first podcast we did last week. So make sure you're subscribing. I'm going to try to get this posted on Apple this week as well, and some other places maybe. But super glad that you are back with me for a second episode. I hope you're finding this week's social media topic of food supply beneficial. Yeah, I know it's something that's maybe a little bit boring. I know last week we talked about water. I promise you next week we'll get into something a little bit more interesting. Food and water is something you got to have. It's the basics of prepping. If you don't have enough food on hand, if you don't have enough water on hand, that's when really that you're going to struggle during a disaster or during a SHTF situation. We really have to make sure we have those things. I was just thinking about, just the other day, what if I go and turn on the shower and there's no water, or if I go, we got a major storm that's occurred, and we Walmart, Food Lion, or whatever stores you go to, or they're not allowing you to go in because there's no food. The food supply is gone, or there's a significant change in shipping supplies or something. What are you going to do next? And there's a lot of people out there that live day to day and don't have extra food on hand. So you know as as inexpensive as it is, make sure you got that extra food and water at least if you're just starting out with the prepping. Super grateful to be back with you this week. This week we're going to be talking about something. Whenever I first started doing content creating, which I believe is really the true foundation of prepping, and that is the topic of the prepper mindset, if you will. The prepper mindset is something, it's a little bit of a lot of different ideas. I'm going to bring forward two ideas this today, but this might be a podcast where I kind of hit on this every once in a while. The prepper mindset, and something I really want to focus on as a prepper that you need to do and have. Really, the prepper mindset is that there is a prepper state of mind. The prepper state of mind is always on, but we're not always worried because as a prepper, you are prepared. As a prepper, we don't have to worry about what we're seeing going on around us because we should have the plans and the resources in place to handle them. And you know what? If we don't, at least we're more prepared than your average person. And then we're able to take those plans and resources that we have prepped, that we have put together to deal with whatever we're facing at hand. If it's a natural disaster, if it's a man-made disaster, if it's a SHTF situation, really, the prepper mindset is critical when you're starting to, and it's not something that something you got to develop over time. So we're going to talk about that today. And we're really going to go, there's a lot of different ways, like I said, that this can be taken. But today's topics I'm going to talk about is situational awareness and intel gathering. And those are kind of the two. Whenever I talk about the prepper mindset, and I really was focusing in on this week and trying to actually wrote down a script kind of to say it, has some detailed notes. I spent quite a bit of time this weekend in doing this, but I was really, I kept coming back to these couple points that situational awareness is key and intel gathering is key. And I kept coming back to this phrase, and I already said it. If you're a prepper and you're prepared, you don't have to go and worry, about what you're seeing in the world, and what's going on. If it's the weather, if it's a natural disaster, if it's what's going on overseas, what's going here at home, maybe what's going on in your community. Because as a prepper, you don't have to worry about those things. So a lot of people think, oh well, you're a prepper, you worry all the time, and you're worrying about this and that and that. No, I'm really not. Because whenever I go see something on the news, I really, my wife's like, oh, should we be worried about this or something? No, because I already have a plan in place. I've already kind of thought this through, and I already have some resources in place as well. Something that I can put towards this if something actually does happen and affects us at home. So that's kind of the two things I'm going to dig in today. Like I said, we're probably going to expand on this in some other Podcast. If I sat here all day, I could this be a couple hour podcast here, and I'm going to try to keep this one again to under 30 minutes because that's what people seem to like. Um, Even though I listen to podcasts that are 4 hours long, and I tell people that, and they're like, "How do you?" I commute. I have. I don't. I like the 4 hour podcast. But some people, we got to break it down a little bit shorter. So, first thing I'm going to talk about is situational awareness. You've probably heard this term before. Maybe you haven't. Maybe you call it something else. Maybe you call it be aware or, something like that. But, as someone that's worked in the first responder field as an emergency manager, situational awareness is a life or death term in my world. And really in anyone's world, in today's world, if you don't know, what I'm talking about, situational awareness is really that fancy term for being prepared, or being aware of your surroundings. As a prepper, it is more than just being aware of what's going on in your immediate surroundings, what's going on, physically around you at the time. But it's what's going on in your local community, in your state, in your nation, regionally, internationally. And yeah, we got to be aware of the weather too. So staying aware of will hopefully ensure that there are no surprises. When there's that disaster, when there's that shit hit the fan, or disaster or emergency, or when something else happens in the world. When you see something occurring that may affect you or your family, you can then begin to think through how it may affect you. That cause and effect, how you might need to plan for what's going on, and then prepare for that event, that disaster, whatever is occurring. It's also important, not to get, tunnel vision when things are happening. It is easy. It is so easy. If you go on the news today, the top thing, so easy. They focus on that one thing, that big buzz, incident that's happening. Right now it seems to be, the college campuses having the riots and the protests and the sit-ins and the camps, around the Israel Palestine war. But if we focus all on that, if you go scroll at the bottom of the news, there's also other things going on in the world. So it's so easy to get tunnel visioned on that one incident that everyone's talking about, that the media is talking about, and then you lose track of everything else that's going on. You lose track of, oh, well, there was there's a big weather event coming. Oh, there's a hurricane in the coast. It's easy to happen during the fall. That gets pushed towards the bottom, and the next thing you know, 3 days later, a hurricane's coming up the coast. It's easy to there was increased crime in your community, and you weren't really realizing that. And next thing you know, the crime hits you. Someone breaks in your car or something like that. It's so easy to get tunnel vision on that one thing. And as a first responder, that is so easy to happen too. It's something we talk about a lot in the emergency management world. You get so tunnel vision on that one incident that's happening, that one disaster, that one, maybe a little hiccup in the incident response, and the next thing you got all this other things unraveling around you, and now you got to clean all those up too, let alone whatever you're focusing on. So as a prepper, you have to get out of the tunnel vision, and you got to look at the 1,000-foot picture. As an emergency manager, that is our job. That's my job. Is PD and law enforcement's focusing on this, focusing on saving people, and EMS is focusing on triage and all that, and then police is over here focusing on the criminal investigation or whatever we're dealing with. But the emergency manager's role is really to look at that 1,000-foot picture and go, okay, we got to think large picture. And as a prepper, you got to do the same thing. So you got to really look at the whole picture of what's going on. It's easy, like I said, to look at those one things, but look at that 1,000-foot picture. When focusing on these disasters, there's often things that might be bigger that's going on. The news media today, like I said, really likes to hone in on different things, and it seems like that's what picks up on the media channels, and that's what's going to run the lines for a little while, and the next thing you know, that doesn't even matter, and now we're on to the next thing. So you have to really learn how to filter through that, and we'll talk about that in the intel gathering portion as well. And I know the news can be depressing today. I know how hard it is, especially to watch the national news. But as a prepper, that is the best way to know what's going on in the world, that's going on in your community, what's going on in your state, in your region, wherever you are. That is the best way. You might not want to hear it, but that is the best way to get your information, and staying situationally aware is by watching the news, and making sure that you are watching. If you're not watching the national news, at least watching the local news, as they typically provide you with pretty much everything you need to know what's going on locally, which we'll talk about in a minute. But locally can affect you a lot more than bigger stuff. And the local news will also focus on what's going on in the nation, probably internationally. And of course, the local news does often a great job of telling your local area's weather, really honing in on the impacts and the hazards that you can expect. And that's why I really, as a prepper, I try to focus in on that local news. Funny, story here. Got married recently. My wife usually does not sleep with the TV on. She didn't even have a TV in her bedroom growing up or whatever. I always did. So I always have the local news on, at night. I watch the local news. I have it running throughout the night. If I wake up, oh, something's happening, I know it's happening. In my job, I kind of have to know that as well. I wake up early in the morning. I'll get up at like 5:30 and sit there on my phone, and she's sleep to the world over there, and I'm over there scrolling through the news, and watching the news, getting my the information I need for the day. And the local news does a great job of the local stuff and highlighting the big stuff that you need, the big national, international stuff that's going on. And then I get in my truck and I turning on the national news. I found many national news stations, CNN, Fox News, NPR, whatever you want to focus on. They have a podcast in the morning that comes out every morning. Sometimes it's like an hourly thing, but it really is like a 10-minute, 15-minute clip of someone just telling you the big stuff that's going on in the world. I have found that to be super beneficial. For one, that I don't have to spend a lot of time, scrolling through the news. Oh, what's this? What's that? Filtering it. It gives you the big highlighted stuff, even gets you the sports if you're interested in that. So that's something I do to stay, situationally aware of what's going on around me. And then, of course, I got the news apps on my phone. I try to, and we'll talk about media bias here in a minute, but, I try to get a good, outlay of media sources, so that way I can kind of take and pick what I want to use, and what might be helpful and what might not be helpful. Of course, getting that weather as well. You got to get the weather. However you get the weather, get the weather. It's important to do. So just making sure, the biggest thing with the situational awareness is, don't focus, so much on the one thing. Focus on all the things. Take a little, don't, sit there and, oh, I'm just going to focus on this, the college students, rioting and protesting on college campuses. Don't do that. Go and look at other things that's going on in the world, because I guarantee you those other things going on in the world, you'll read over them and be like, why isn't this the headline news? Well, that's not what's trending at the time. That's the media bias that you have to be, a little bit filtering it a little bit, and knowing all that. So we'll get into the intel gathering as well. But staying situationally aware, not even when I just talked about the larger picture of situationally aware, but stay situationally aware when you're out in public. It amazes me, and I'm guilty for it too. But I try to get better at it. I'm going through Walmart, people are scrolling on their phone, and there could be someone throw a glass bottle on the ground, they'd have no clue. They'd just be walking right through it. That's what you really have to stay situationally aware for. I'm always I had, again, another wife story here. When you're newly married, you get a lot of good stories out of it. So I'm try to use some of this as well. But I've done this for even when we're dating. I always got to be able to look at the door. If we're at a restaurant, I have her trained where she's sitting her back to the door. My face is towards the door. I want to see who's coming in. I like to people watch. As a prepper, situational awareness, you got to be able to people watch. Pick up on human behavior. If something doesn't look right, it probably is not right. And then that's when your senses come, and that's that fight flight type of reaction. So making sure that you are situationally aware, went out in public as well. If you're driving down the road, you see something that looks weird, call 911. There are so many people today that are like, oh, someone else will get it. Someone else will talk. We'll call 911. They'll report it to law enforcement, or even like a car wreck. Oh, someone else is called. No, go and call 911, and make sure they're aware, because someone else might have said the same thing or thought the same thing that you did. So, just rambled on a little bit about situational awareness there, but that's just some of my thoughts on that topic. We'll expand on the topic as we go through other segments, but the next thing I want to talk about is intel gathering. So, you've watched the news, you have got all this information. How are you processing it? How are you going, okay, this is kind of reliable, this is not, I don't need to worry about this, I might need to worry about this. How do I put stuff on my radar? And that is incredibly hard to do nowadays. I am unfortunate to say it is incredibly hard to see what's reliable and what's not reliable. As Donald Trump says, fake news. Hey, fake news is out there. I can tell you, I'll tell you right now, fake news is out there. There are people out there on social media, even in the media, that are developing news just to get your attention, and get that sound bite, or that big ticket item that's going to run on the news aisles for a while, stations for a while. So you got to know what's reliable and what's not reliable. And if you're like me, I have a couple Twitter or now X pages. Sorry, I'm not. I still call it Twitter. But I follow some people on there that I have a different account for this, but I'll follow some people that might not be a reliable source, but it's a good way to get some information that the media probably is filtering. Things they don't want you to know, especially overseas, things that are going on in the Middle East currently. Great things on there. If you want to talk to me about that, hit me up. Happy to talk about the conspiracy theories and all that fun stuff. But you really got to know what's reliable and not reliable. Most of the big news stations, it's going to be, I'm not going to say 100% reliable by any means, but it's going to be a little bit more reliable than your grandma sharing something on Facebook that someone else shared that is completely wrong. I see this all the time with weather. It is amazing how many people become meteorologists come September when hurricane season pops up. Oh, it's going to go this way, or it's going to go that way. Are you a meteorologist? Did you go to school? I don't even do that, and I didn't even go to school for it. And you got to know what's real and what's not. So I think most people today know that, but they get so caught up in it because everyone else is around them, and they're not using their what I'll call common sense. And you got to do that. You got to use your common sense when looking at these especially social media. Do not get all your information from TikTok. Please do not come to me and say, Blake, I saw this on TikTok, and is this real? It's probably not, because it's probably some teenager that's created this. And I tell you right now, I work in K-12. I'm not trusting any teenagers with news possible for the most part. We got to make sure that you're not just sharing things that is unreliable, or whatever. There's a lot of hoaxes out there today. A lot of times people want to spread misinformation for whatever their capital gain, or whatever the gain is, and we got to really focus on that. So reliable, not reliable sources. There is that little part. The next thing is planning for how this is going to affect you. So you looked at the news. Let's just take a weather event for example. That's a good way to start. That way I don't get into too much of the politics. You see, you're watching the Weather Channel. Also, I like the Weather Channel. Not good for local news, but if you're like a weather geek, good for overall U.S. weather. Good dialogue, good science information as well. They can give you a little bit of science behind the meteorology and all that. So you're watching the Weather Channel one night, and you see there's a storm system. It's moving across the middle, or the Midwest, and they say, okay, if you're on the southeast, it's going to affect you on Friday. Okay, well, what is it going to do? So you're looking at those hazards. You're looking at those impacts. And then they get a little bit closer. It's Thursday night. Unfortunately, meteorologists are great and all, but they sometimes, especially with severe weather, it's kind of hard to get down on the impacts. Like, okay, it's going to be tornadoes and all this. They can look at the models and all that, but you really got to prepare for it all. And so Thursday night's coming, and we it's saying the National Weather Service, okay, there's going to be increased chance of tornadoes. We're at a marginal 3 risk of severe weather. One podcast I'll go over all these weather terms, and so now okay, this is going to affect me. This is what I need to plan for. This is what I need to resources in place. I might want to leave work early. Might want to go get the kids early from school. Really processing that information, and then planning for what you have, and all of that. Same thing with other things that are happening in the world. Look at, say you work on a college campus today. Say that your community is in a college campus, and you see all this rioting and things are happening, and maybe your college campus or your local municipality doesn't have that as much, but it could. I've seen universities here in North Carolina that oh, that's not going to happen there. It's kind of happening. So you kind of got to plan for it. Okay, there's going to be a riot or there's going to be something like that. We're getting an election season, so something like this could happen. You got to plan for that stuff. You got to look to the future. Preppers look to the future and prepare for the future and hope that it doesn't happen. You got to kind of have that worst case scenario and hope for the best, or plan for the, hope for the best and, plan for the worst. And really, process that information through that. And then, and planning on what intel you have. Just like I said, if you know that, same thing with you're watching the news in the morning. Oh, okay, there's a wreck up the road, on my major highway that I commute past every day. Well, I need to plan now to go around that. Well, most people only know one way to get to work, which is sad. But you need to know multiple ways to get to work and multiple ways to get home. I think I talked about this on my first week. It amazes me how many people, even in the fire service, that you're working on a wreck and they're like, well, I only know how to take this one road. Well, there's other roads around here. You can detour around it. Know how to get home and do all that. So that's the same thing with the intel gathering. It's I'm not talking about CIA type of intel here. I'm talking about basic knowledge, basic common sense intel that you need to take, process, and then put out and change, plan, buy resources and all that. So that's kind of the intel. We'll talk about this a little bit more, but kind of the cycle of prepping. Really, it's identifying those hazards, those vulnerabilities, and that's through looking at media, looking at what's going on around you. Then it's planning, making sure that you have plans in place around it. Then it's gathering those resources, that food, that water. If you live in a flood prone area, getting flooding supplies and stuff like that. And then once you have those resources, is testing them and exercising them. Nothing's good until you actually put it in play and actually know that it's working. So that is kind of where I wanted to go today. I hope I didn't ramble too much on you. But it's really situational awareness and intel gathering is the first two things to the prepper mindset. And from there, we'll build on some other things in a couple weeks as well. I really think that situational awareness is one of the key things as a prepper that a lot of people just today don't have. And they then don't have that way of, okay, something's happening. What do I do? And they get, even if they are situational aware, they get this mind block or this mind, numbness. And they're like, okay, now, then they get all so worried and so, caught up in what's happening. They forget the plan. They forget to prepare. They just sit there and worry. And then that does no one any good whenever something happens and, shit hits the fan. So we really got to make sure that you start with a situational awareness and then move into that intel gathering. And then we'll kind of go and expand on that as well. So hope this was beneficial to you today. Exciting news. Next week is the first is Hurricane Preparedness Week. So we are going to be doing all things hurricane preparedness, all things, might get into some hurricane, weather, meteorology. I'd really like to find someone could talk more about that that's better at it than me. So if you're interested in being on this podcast, if you have an interest in prepping, if you have an interest in meteorology, in the news, something like that, hit me up on Facebook, on Instagram, on YouTube, wherever you're getting your content. Or send me an email. Do that as well. I know it's old fashioned, but do that as well. And let me know. Say, hey, I would like to be on your podcast. I'll message you a little bit about it, and we'll go from there. So next week, the All Hazards Prepper will be covering all things you need to know for the upcoming hurricane season, which many universities have already come out and researchers, scientists, meteorologists, and said that this is going to be a very busy season. So got to prepare now for it and make sure that you and your family have a plan as well. So hope everyone enjoyed this podcast. Make sure that you subscribe and on the Spotify and wherever else you're listening to this podcast, and make sure you're liking the content as well. And next week is the final week for the giveaway. So make sure you check that out on my Facebook and Instagram as well. Hope everyone stays safe out there. The All Hazard Prepper out.